in the mountains of Kentucky, on the dangerous road to the western frontier, stood an inn that was spoken of with reverence. Millbrook offered not only shelter and food, it gave a warmth that could be found nowhere else. It was run by the four Cunningham sisters, and weary travelers left as though they had rediscovered a lost home. The sisters' fame spread across 3 states. Merchants postponed business just to stay there. Cattlemen chose longer routes for the sake of their hospitality. Men wept as they left Millbrook, but in the winter of 1851, rumors of abandoned wagons and missing travelers reached the authorities. Then it became clear. The warmth of the inn had a terrible price. Human lives. The story began earlier. In 1831, Jeremy Cunningham died, leaving his daughters, Margaret, Catherine, Sarah, and Elizabeth, a large estate and an inn at the crossroads of trade routes. The eldest, Margaret, was shrewd and calculating. Catherine possessed beauty and charm. Sarah knew the power of mountain herbs, and the youngest, 16-year-old Elizabeth, disarmed with her innocence. The estate, with 6 rooms, a spacious kitchen, and a stone hearth, quickly became a cult place. The Cunninghams were spoken of as keepers of comfort and trust. They were aided by gray-haired steward Ezra Hawthorne, whose honest face inspired respect, and the Zimmer brothers, German farmers, hard-working and taciturn, died in the autumn of 1831, then entered its golden age. Guests were given care and a sense of importance. But behind this idyll lay isolation, which over time turned into secrecy. The first alarming sign appeared in November 1832. Thomas Kellerman, a cattleman from Richmond with a sack of gold, arrived at the inn. Recently widowed and lonely, he was a perfect target. Margaret quickly assessed his wealth. Sarah prepared dinner for him. Elizabeth laughed at his stories, and Catherine gave him what he desired most, the illusion of closeness. A few days later Kellerman looked renewed, and even planned to return. But he never reached Kentucky. His horse was found wandering near the Cumberland Pass. He himself vanished without a trace. In reality, that night he was met by Heinrich Zimmer, a blacksmith's hammer to the skull, the body wrapped in canvas and buried in a forest pit. The gold returned to Millbrook. At the kitchen table the sisters counted the coins and realized they had found a new path. Margaret noted that the profit from one night exceeded a year's income. Catherine confirmed how easy it was to manipulate lonely men. Sarah understood her knowledge of herbs could conceal traces. Even young Elizabeth proved she could keep horrific secrets. Thus was born a method they perfected for almost 20 years. The victims were lonely men with money, without family or a fixed route. Sarah expanded her garden, turning it into an arsenal of poisons. Pokeweed berries caused pain. Foxglove brought heart failure. Hemlock killed silently and swiftly. Catherine perfected the art of seduction. To religious men she was devout. To scholars, learned. To mourners, a comfort. Elizabeth, the most trusting, became a living shield, for no one suspected the sweet girl. The Zimmer brothers discovered caves in the mountains, where they secretly delivered bodies and sealed them behind stones. Belongings were sorted, valuables kept, the rest destroyed. Ezra Hawthorne served as cover. His word that a guest had left alive and well was never doubted. In the spring of 1833 their victim was tobacco merchant William Fraser from North Carolina. He carried $500 in silver. A bachelor accustomed to solitude, he was captivated by the inn's coziness. The sisters acted flawlessly. Margaret drew out his details. Sarah built trust with food. Elizabeth played the piano, and Catherine led him into an emotional snare. But on the 3rd evening, she noticed him with a volume of poetry. Pretending to know little of verse, she asked him to read aloud. For hours Fraser read under lamplight, and his heart softened. Catherine listened, touched his hand, instilling a feeling of rebirth. He extended his stay, while Sarah was already adding poison to his tea. The symptoms were mild. He attributed them to fatigue and excitement. A week later Fraser looked weakened, but happy. His money was already being placed in Margaret's chest, while Catherine smiled with the same expression that had comforted his final evenings. The story of the Millbrook Inn continued. Some vanished in the forests. Others swore they would return, not knowing that the road back was already closed. And with each new victim, the sisters became ever more skilled. On Fraser's last evening at the Millbrook Inn, Catherine invited him to a private dinner in her room. Sarah had prepared his favorite dishes and a bottle of wine with a carefully measured dose of hemlock extract. Sitting with Catherine in the intimate glow of candlelight, sharing his dreams and fears with the woman he believed could change his life forever, Fraser had no idea he was already dying. The poison worked exactly as Sarah had predicted. His death appeared to be a sudden heart attack. His body was discovered in Catherine's bed the next morning, as if he had peacefully fallen asleep after a night of passion. Even if a doctor had been summoned, the symptoms would have matched a natural seizure in a middle-aged man. Fraser was buried with honors in the inn's small cemetery, the final element Margaret had added to their operation. The gravestone seemed like a mark of respect, but was in truth a cover. His money and belongings vanished. The wagon and horses were soon sold to merchants, and his disappearance was explained away as a decision to remain in Kentucky. By the end of the year 1833, the sisters had perfected their system. They chose no more than 5 victims per year, avoiding suspicion. Every death had a plausible explanation: illness, accident, or the choice to settle in the West. Most important of all, they trusted one another completely, leaving no trace to the outside world. And just when it seemed the horrors of Millbrook had reached their peak, the story grew even darker. From 1834 to 1845 the inn gained renown. Travelers compared it to the finest establishments in Richmond and Baltimore. Margaret expanded the business: stables, a distillery, hunting tours. These legitimate enterprises brought income and strengthened the sisters' reputation. The guest register from that period, now preserved in archives, testifies to their success. Merchants, politicians, speculators, and adventurers became regular patrons. Yet behind the facade of prosperity lurked a machine of murder, polished to perfection. Catherine possessed a gift for identifying men who would not be missed: solitary, discreet, without close ties. Sarah broadened her knowledge of poisons, mastering dozens of toxins with varied symptoms. Elizabeth drew out personal histories through innocent conversation, while Margaret commanded the entire operation like a military staff. The victims numbered about 43. Each killing was meticulously planned. In 1838, a surveyor named Jonathan Waverley arrived at Millbrook. He traveled alone, carried money and valuable equipment, and his disappearance would likely go unnoticed. Margaret instantly recognized the perfect target. Catherine charmed him with talk of the mountains. Sarah slipped toxins into his meals, and Elizabeth fostered a sense of friendship. Within 3 weeks, Waverley died of symptoms resembling mountain fever. His property vanished, and his body was hidden in the caves. The sisters' genius lay not only in their methods of killing, but in the image they projected as respectable women. They attended church, made donations, and participated in community life. Margaret sat on the trade council. Sarah tended to neighbors' illnesses. Catherine taught children, and Elizabeth organized festivities. All this provided alibis and earned respect. By 1845, they had become wealthy landowners of Western Virginia, investing in property, lending money, even holding shares in riverboats. Newspapers praised them as examples of female success. Yet behind the facade lay the bones of dozens of men. Millbrook was a web, enticing and deadly. The beginning of the end came from within their own staff. Heinrich Zimmer, one of the servant brothers, after an injury and dependency on medicine, began to lose his mind. He dreamed of the victims' faces and spoke of 43 souls demanding justice. Sarah tried to calm him, but recognized the threat. Soon she slipped poison into his wine at dinner, and Heinrich died that night. His death was attributed to heart disease. Klaus, his brother, survived, but suspicion grew in his mind in March of 1851. The last guest died, a cotton merchant named Samuel Hartwell. His disappearance raised questions. He had arranged to meet a partner, and when he failed to appear, alarm was sounded. Sheriff Thomas Brennan began an investigation. At first it seemed routine, but Brennan's persistence uncovered inconsistencies. Witnesses mentioned Hartwell's belongings and horses after his supposed departure. Brennan compared earlier cases of missing persons. The statistics revealed a striking concentration of disappearances around Millbrook. The breakthrough came when he spoke with Klaus. The man hinted at dark secrets of the mountains and confessed to strange events. without naming the sisters outright. But it was enough for Brennan to secure a search warrant at dawn on the 15th of April, 1851. A squad surrounded the inn. The sisters greeted them calmly. Margaret spoke with confidence about their willingness to cooperate. Catherine expressed indignation. Sarah offered drinks. Elizabeth played the frightened girl. Yet the search exposed hidden stashes, personal belongings of vanished guests, Sarah's poisonous garden, records of toxins. The most horrifying discovery was the caves with bodies, to which Klaus led the investigators. And even then the story was not over. The sisters had not yet spoken their final word. At the moment when Brennan prepared to lay formal charges, Margaret stepped forward, her voice firm, and silence fell across the room. She knew they had only one path left. Margaret stepped forward, her voice firm, and silence fell over the room. But no words could hide the horror that investigators had discovered in the caves and hidden chambers of the hotel. That in the depths of the cliffs, the skeletons of 43 men were found, along with personal belongings worth thousands of dollars. Experts determined that some of the victims had died from blunt force trauma, others had been strangled, and still others poisoned. These discoveries became proof of the most terrifying conspiracy in the history of Virginia. The trial of the Cunningham Sisters shook the nation. Newspapers wrote about 4 women who, for almost 20 years, had turned the hotel into a trap for unsuspecting travelers. The prosecutor presented an abundance of evidence: remains, lost belongings, records of poisons. The eldest sister, Margaret, denied everything, calling the evidence fabricated. Catherine wavered between protests and confessions. Sarah kept a grim silence, while the youngest, Elizabeth, insisted she had only obeyed her elders and begged for mercy. The defense attorney tried to portray the sisters as victims of circumstance, orphans forced to fight for survival, but the evidence proved far too strong. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours and found all 4 guilty of first-degree murder. Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah were sentenced to hanging, while Elizabeth received life imprisonment. The execution took place on October 12, 1851, before a large crowd. Margaret met death coldly and silently. Catherine and Sarah held hands as the nooses were placed around their necks. Elizabeth was sent to Richmond Prison, where she spent 37 years. She denied her guilt to the very end and died in solitude in 1888. The fates of their accomplices varied. Klaus Zimmer, who testified against the sisters, soon disappeared without a trace. His brother Heinrich died earlier, unable to cope with his nightmares. Warden Ezra Hawthorne received 10 years and died in prison after 3 that the Cunningham property was auctioned off. The hotel itself was briefly reopened, but its grim reputation repelled visitors. Soon, the building was demolished, the land sold to a mining company, and the shaft where the bodies had been found was sealed. On the site, a stone memorial was erected. Here lie unknown travelers, 1832, 1851. The story of Millbrook led to serious changes in the law. In Virginia and neighboring states, mandatory registration of guests, notification of authorities about deaths, and regular inspections of inns were introduced. These measures, remembered as the Cunningham laws, remained in effect almost until the 20th century. A financial investigation revealed that the sisters' fortune exceeded $50,000, a colossal sum for the 19th century. This money went toward compensating the families of the victims and funding the development of rural police. Criminologists later concluded that Margaret had been the chief strategist, cold and calculating; Catherine, the impulsive seductress; Sarah, the poison expert with sadistic tendencies, while Elizabeth's role remained disputed. Some saw her as a victim of pressure, others as a willing accomplice. The greatest horror of the case was that it might have continued for many more years. Only chance, Zimmer's nervous breakdown, and Sheriff Brennan's persistence put an end to the sisters' crimes. Their deeds revealed the vulnerability of travelers of that era. Without communication or protection, a person could vanish forever. The sisters exploited this mercilessly, turning hospitality into a deadly trap. Over time, the story of Millbrook grew into legend. Some called the sisters witches, others martyrs. In the 20th century, the site of the hotel became a source of superstition. Tourists found buttons, scraps of fabric, believing them relics of the victims. In the 1980s, Ground-penetrating radar revealed new anomalies in the area, resembling hidden graves, but no excavations were carried out. Perhaps the 43 bodies discovered were only part of the tragedy.